They made me sit at the far end of the ballroom near the kitchen doors where the waiters pushed past without looking. No name card, no toast in my honor, no food, just an empty plate gleaming under the chandeliers I paid for. When I looked up, my son turned his face away. And Lacey, she raised her glass and laughed. A soft, deliberate humiliation. Public, final. They wanted everyone to see me small, but they forgot who wrote the check, who owned the keys, who held the deed to their perfect little future. That house was a wedding gift, past tense, and I do not gift respect to those who serve me shame. My name is Beatrice Lyman, and I am 73 years old. I live alone in a quiet house at the end of a tree-lined cul-de-sac, the kind of place where squirrels chatter louder than the neighbors. My husband Harold passed 6 years ago after a long illness, and since then, the silence in this house has grown louder than any argument we ever had. We built a life here, modest, full of routines, rich in the kind of quiet joy that young people overlook. Jeremy is my only child, and until recently, he was my pride. When he met Lacey, I smiled through every whirlwind moment. I said yes when he needed help with the ring. I said yes when he asked for help covering the down payment for their dream wedding. I said yes even when I had to cash out Harold's last investment account, because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We say yes until there's nothing left but memories and the hope that we mattered. Lacey had big dreams. A ballroom with chandeliers, flower arrangements, like something out of a royal garden, a 5-course menu with wine pairings. Jeremy said it was all for her. I believed him. I wanted to believe that love was a reason worth stretching for. I didn't expect gratitude, but I also didn't expect erasure. The weeks leading up to the wedding, I started noticing things. My name was missing from the programs. No seat at the rehearsal dinner. No mention in the speeches. Jeremy said it was all just oversight, that I was reading into things, that I was tired. I was tired, but not blind. That night in the ballroom, when the plate arrived empty cold, deliberate something inside me stopped shrinking. I saw the truth laid bare under crystal light. I wasn't family, I was a transaction, and it was time I stopped paying. Mornings in my house began the same way they had for decades. A cup of tea, 2 sugars, the radio, humming soft classical music in the kitchen. I liked the way the early sun cut across the tiles and lit up the dust I hadn't had the energy to sweep. There was a comfort in the repetition in the silence that didn't ask anything of me. Harold used to read the paper at the table while I pruned the roses out front. He was a tall man, slow to speak, but when he did, I listened. Cancer took him slow and quiet. Grief did the opposite. It arrived like a thunderclap, then settled into the crevices of my days, showing up in half-sentences and grocery lists with one too many bananas. People called at first. Church friends, old neighbors, even Jeremy when he remembered. But time has a way of thinning the crowd. Eventually it was just me, the kettle, and the weight of a house too big for one person. I started making lists. Not of chores, those never interested me. I wrote down everything. I still had the paid-off house, Harold's old Ford, the necklace he gave me on our 30th anniversary. These lists weren't for nostalgia. They were my way of proving to myself that I hadn't disappeared. Then Jeremy called. He sounded nervous, almost like the child who once begged me to fix his science fair volcano. Only this time it wasn't baking soda he needed. It was money. He told me he had met someone. Lacey. She was bright, ambitious, a planner. She had dreams, and he wanted to give them to her. A real wedding, he said. The kind she deserved. He never asked directly. He didn't have to. The silence after his words said it all. I said yes, of course, because that's what mothers do. The first time I met Lacey in person, she shook my hand like she was closing a business deal. Polite, poised, pretty, not warm. She wore sharp perfume and sharper heels, and she looked at my house like it was something to be remodeled. I told myself not to judge. Jeremy seemed happy. That was what mattered, and I wanted her to like me. I brought out the good china. When they visited, made roast chicken with rosemary just the way Jeremy liked it. Lacey said it was quaint. At first it was small things. She always had her phone out during dinner. She'd refer to me in the third person, even when I was right there. Jeremy's mom said this, or she offered to help. One afternoon, I overheard her asking Jeremy if my curtains were original to the house, with a little laugh like she couldn't imagine anyone living with something so dated. Jeremy chuckled. That hurt more than it should have. When they got engaged, Lacey didn't call to tell me. I found out through a photo Jeremy texted the ring on her perfectly manicured hand with the caption, "She said yes, no context, no invitation to celebrate." I sent back a heart emoji. It felt both childish and hollow. They started talking about wedding plans almost immediately. Lacey had a binder tabs fabric samples spreadsheets. Jeremy told me she's been planning this since she was a little girl. That was supposed to make the endless details charming, I suppose. But it made me feel like a prop being slotted in. Still I smiled. Still I listened, because that's what mothers do. But late at night, I began to feel a small, unnameable ache, a sense that I was being slowly moved out of frame. It started with missed calls. I'd dial Jeremy's number, and it would ring once, maybe twice, before going to voicemail. I left messages, cheerful ones, updates about the roses blooming early, or the cardinal I'd seen at the feeder. Days would pass before I got a reply, and when it came, it was usually a short text, "Busy mom, will call soon." Soon stretched into weeks. Then, there were the plans I was never quite invited to. A bridal shower I only learned about from a Facebook photo, Lacey glowing in white surrounded by friends, and a cake that read, "Miss to Mrs." I asked Jeremy about it the next time he stopped by. He looked uncomfortable shifting in his seat. "It was more of a friends thing," he mumbled. "Lacey didn't want you to feel out of place." Out of place, in the life I helped build. He started suggesting things gently at first. Maybe I should look into meal delivery services. He'd noticed I seemed thinner. Maybe a part-time helper around the house. Maybe a smaller place closer to town. "It's just that you've been forgetting things," he said one evening, like that time you asked me twice about the same wedding date. I remembered that moment well. I'd asked once and clarified a second time because the first answer had been vague. But Jeremy looked at me like I'd lost my grip on reality. Lacey stood behind him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I started questioning myself. Was I forgetting more than I realized? Had I become too much? One night I walked into the kitchen and stood there blank, unsure of why I'd gone in. My heart pounded. I stared at the refrigerator like it might remind me. Eventually I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the table in the dark. That's when the doubt truly began to bloom. Quiet, persistent, corrosive. Exactly the way they planted it. 2 weeks before the wedding, Jeremy called and said they had something special planned for me. "Lacey's idea," he said brightly. "You're going to love it. She's making sure you have a seat of honor." It was the first time in months I'd heard excitement in his voice when speaking to me. For a moment I allowed myself to believe him. I even went shopping the next day and bought a new dress, steel blue, simple and soft. Something that made me feel like myself again. A few days later, a formal invitation arrived. The envelope was thick, expensive, with gold foil lettering. Inside, tucked neatly behind the RSVP card, was a small folded note in Lacey's handwriting. "You'll be seated close to the couple's table, so guests can acknowledge your role in Jeremy's life. Thank you again for your generous support. We look forward to sharing this special day with you." It was almost kind. Almost. I placed the card on the mantel. I practiced smiling in the mirror. I imagined myself sitting close to the newlyweds, laughing politely, maybe even giving a short speech. I hoped secretly that they had turned a corner, that perhaps all the awkwardness, all the subtle erasures, had been misunderstandings, that maybe I had been too sensitive. The night before the wedding, I ironed my dress. I polished the shoes Harold always said made me look elegant. I even curled my hair the old-fashioned way with pink foam rollers. In the quiet of my bedroom, I allowed myself a fragile hope. But hope, as I was about to learn, is sometimes just the dress rehearsal for heartbreak. And Lacey's note, a lie printed in cursive. The ballroom sparkled. Golden lights spilled from crystal chandeliers, dancing off polished silver, and rows of crystal glasses lined like soldiers on white linen. The air hummed with the clink of forks, the swell of music, and the syrupy chatter of too sweet champagne. I arrived early as instructed. A young woman with a clipboard scanned my name, smiled too fast, and motioned vaguely toward the far end of the hall. "Right this way, Ms. Lyman." I followed her past table after table, past laughter and lipstick and perfume, until we reached a small round table placed so close to the kitchen doors that I could hear the dishwashers clatter. I waited for her to say there had been a mistake. She didn't. The place card read simply, Jeremy's mother. No name, no title, no warmth. From across the room, Lacey met my eyes. She raised her glass in a mock toast and turned away. I sat. The speeches began. Lacey's father praised her beauty, her drive, her refinement. Jeremy thanked his in-laws for the incredible support and generosity. My name was never spoken. Then came the meal. Plates emerged from the kitchen like clockwork seared duck truffle potatoes, spring greens with edible flowers. The server reached my table last. He placed a plate in front of me, gleaming, porcelain, empty. I looked up. He hesitated, almost apologetic, but said nothing. People began to notice. Conversation stuttered. Someone at the next table glanced, then looked quickly away. Jeremy wouldn't meet my gaze. I sat there, hands folded, heart pounding so loudly I couldn't hear the music anymore. That plate wasn't an oversight. It was a message, and I received it. I didn't say goodbye. No dramatic exit, no scene. I stood up quietly, took my clutch from beneath the chair, and walked out beneath the chandeliers I'd helped pay for. The valet looked startled to see me so soon. I smiled, or something close to it, and handed him my ticket. The drive home was quiet, except for the soft tick of the turn signal and the occasional thump of my heartbeat in my ears. At home, I kicked off my shoes, peeled off the dress I had so carefully chosen, and hung it back in the closet. It still smelled faintly of hairspray and disappointment. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my reflection in the darkened window. Not crying. Not yet. Just watching. In the stillness, I thought about all the ways I had tried to be enough, the casseroles I made, the checks I signed, the cards with careful handwriting, the way I clapped for every one of Jeremy's school plays, even when he only had one line. It wasn't just the plate. It was the culmination of being slowly erased until all that remained was an obligation they couldn't quite ignore. Until tonight, I thought I would feel rage. Instead, I felt hollow. I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table the way Harold used to. I imagined him across from me reading the paper, occasionally glancing over the rim of his glasses to ask if I wanted the rest of his toast. "Did you see what they did?" I whispered to the empty chair. The house said nothing. On the counter, still in its gold-embossed envelope, sat the card with their names, Jeremy and Lacey. I picked it up, turned it over, and tucked it into the trash. The days that followed passed like fog. I didn't answer the phone, not that it rang much. I think Jeremy must have told himself I was just tired or that I left early because of a headache. Maybe he didn't wonder at all. I moved through the house like a ghost, brushing past memories I no longer had the energy to dust. Harold's slippers still sat under the armchair, the ones I couldn't bring myself to throw away. I touched them each morning with the tip of my toe like they might move. Meals became suggestions, toast sometimes, tea that went cold before I remembered to sip it. The radio stayed off. The birds outside chirped with an enthusiasm that made my chest ache. Sleep was the worst. I would lie still, trying to remember the last time Jeremy had hugged me without glancing over his shoulder at Lacey, or the sound of his laugh when he was 8 and I'd let him stir too many chocolate chips into the cookie dough. The boy I raised felt further away than Harold. One morning I opened my closet and stared at the dress I wore to the wedding. It hung perfectly still, like it had never touched humiliation. I took it out, folded it slowly, and placed it in a donation box by the front door. Let someone else wear it to a celebration where they mattered. I kept waiting for anger to find me. It didn't. Instead, there was grief, but not the kind that cried. This was quieter, thicker. It filled the room, the lungs, the bloodstream, a grief without shape or edge, just weight. And under it, the dull pulse of a single thought. Maybe I was the one who had always loved too loudly, and maybe silence was the only thing they would let me keep. When Jeremy was born, we didn't have much. Harold worked long shifts at the mill, and I cleaned houses on weekends to make the mortgage. We shared one car, one bathroom, and one dream that our boy would never feel the weight we carried. Jeremy had new shoes before either of us did. Piano lessons we couldn't afford. Summer camps paid for with overtime and coupons. Harold skipped lunch some days so Jeremy could have better cleats for Little League. I patched my winter coat 3 seasons in a row. And we were happy. Every time Jeremy smiled, it felt like a small victory. He was smart, curious, always building things with his hands. When he wanted to join the science fair in 4th grade, we built a volcano together in the garage using baking soda red dye and an old cardboard box. He didn't win, but he hugged me so hard afterward you'd think he had. When he wanted to apply to out-of-state colleges, we took out a second mortgage. I remember crying in the bank parking lot, not because of fear, but pride. He was going to be the first lineman to earn a degree. We made it happen. And when Harold got sick, I didn't tell Jeremy the full cost. I didn't want to ruin his final semester. I sold my wedding ring to pay for medications. I told him it was being resized. I thought sacrifice was the highest form of love. I never asked for anything in return. Not really. Just to be remembered. To be valued. I see now how easy it is for people to take love when it comes too freely. It stops looking like a gift. It starts looking like a given. And Jeremy, my sweet boy turned stranger, had learned that lesson better than I ever meant to teach it. The house wasn't big. 2 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a small fenced yard. But it had good bones, as Harold used to say. South-facing windows, a new roof, close to a school, and tucked in a quiet neighborhood with maple trees that turned crimson in the fall. I found it by accident driving home from the pharmacy one morning. It was nothing flashy, modest, honest. I pulled over and stared at the for sale sign in the yard for a long time. Something about it felt right, like it had been waiting. That evening I called the realtor. I didn't tell Jeremy. I didn't tell anyone. The money was what remained from Harold's pension and the account I'd been quietly growing for years. A little here, a little there. I skipped dinners out, let my hair go gray sooner than planned, wore shoes until the soles turned soft. When the sale closed, I stood in the empty living room and imagined them there. Jeremy helping Lacey unpack. Her hanging curtains. Maybe a dog someday. Maybe children. I imagined birthdays, Thanksgivings, a life built on the foundation I had laid. It was going to be their wedding gift, a surprise, a fresh start, something they would never expect, never forget. I bought a small cedar box and tucked the house key inside with the deed. I even had a card made printed on cream linen stock with gold script, "For your new beginning, love Mom." I kept it hidden in my closet under the blankets beside a worn photograph of Harold in his fishing hat. Every few days I'd take it out, hold the key in my palm, and imagine their joy. It had been my final defining act of love, and now it would become something else entirely. There were costs that didn't show up on paper, the kind of debt that doesn't come with interest rates or bank statements, the kind you pay in energy and dignity in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn. I had always lived frugally, but the past few years had demanded more. Rising groceries, repairs to the roof, a surprise hospital bill. And still I had managed to carve out enough to buy them that house, bit by bit, week by week. But it wasn't just the money. I had sold more than jewelry. I sold my comfort, my security, the ability to say yes to a weekend getaway with old friends. I stopped going to the beauty parlor. I let my bridge club membership lapse because the annual dues felt like indulgence. I even turned down a new washing machine when the old one started rattling. I washed by hand that spring. My fingers cracked and bled, but I told no one, because to say it out loud would make it real, and I didn't want to tarnish the gift. I wanted the house to feel clean, untouched by sacrifice. The emotional toll was harder to measure. I stopped calling people back. I stopped sending Christmas cards. I withdrew slowly like tea fading in hot water. I told myself I was simply tired. But deep down I was dimming myself on purpose, as if my quietness might be an offering. As if shrinking would make more room for Jeremy and Lacey to shine. Looking back now, I see it for what it was, self-erasure in the name of love. And the cruelest part, they never even noticed. Or worse, they did. It was the sound of the garbage truck that stirred me that morning. I had left the card on the counter again, the wedding invitation, gold-foiled and smug, now curling at the edges with the damp air. I picked it up for the 100th time, held it by the corner, and watched as the garbage collectors moved from can to can down the street. Their movements were rhythmic, almost graceful in their efficiency. I opened the back door and stepped out in my slippers, the cold porch biting at my heels. Then, without ceremony, I dropped the card into the bin. It landed on top of yesterday's tea bag and the remains of a bruised pear. A soft thud. Final. I stood there a long time, the air stinging my cheeks, watching the truck come closer. It let out a deep, mechanical sigh as it lifted my bin and swallowed the contents whole. I should have felt lighter, but something else rose instead. A slow, strange clarity. Not bitterness, not rage, but something sharper, something still and sober, a thought I had never dared consider until that morning. They do not deserve this. They do not deserve me. I walked back inside and opened the hall closet, pushed past the winter coats, reached for the cedar box. I held it for a long time, sitting in Harold's old recliner, running my fingers over the brass hinges like worry stones. The weight of the key inside felt different now, not like a gift, like a lever. I placed the box on the table, went to the kitchen, brewed a fresh cup of tea, no sugar, and then I began to write. Just one sentence, neat cursive, steady hand. A home needs respect as its foundation. I hope you find one. Then I folded the note and tucked it where the card used to be. It fit perfectly. I didn't cry when I wrote the note. I didn't hesitate either. After weeks of walking through fog, I could finally see the outlines of myself again, not the version they tried to shape or the one I'd shrunk to fit inside their lives, but the woman Harold loved, the woman who had once stood firm through harder storms. I folded the linen note and slipped it into the cedar box where the card had once been. The key rested beside it, gleaming, unaware it had been stripped of its privilege. This wasn't about revenge. I didn't want to hurt Jeremy. I still loved him, even if I no longer recognized the man he'd become. But I was done offering pieces of myself to people who fed on them like scraps. I was done making myself small. That afternoon, I went into town. I had my name reaffirmed as sole deed holder at the county clerk's office. I updated my will. I met with Mr. Harold's old lawyer, and told him everything. He looked at me through wire-rimmed glasses and nodded. "It's good you came in, Beatrice. It's time someone did right by you." On the way home, I stopped at the bakery and bought myself a small lemon tart. I ate it alone at the kitchen table, the crust flaking beneath my fork, like delicate armor falling away. That night I didn't pace. I didn't question. I slept. The box sat on my nightstand, quiet and patient. And I made myself a promise. This story would not end with an empty plate. It would end with a full-life mine. The next morning, I opened the filing cabinet in the den. The one with the creaky bottom drawer that Harold always meant to fix. Inside was a folder labeled simply House. I pulled it out and laid the contents across the desk. The deed notarized in my name alone, property tax receipts, inspection records, all of it signed, sealed, and mine. I hadn't looked at these documents since closing day. Back then, they had symbolized hope. Now they were armor. I called Mr. Harrow and asked him to meet me for lunch. He chose a quiet booth in the corner of a downtown diner we both used to frequent with our spouses. We ordered coffee. No small talk. I slid the folder across the table. "I want to make sure there are no loopholes. No way they can claim this." He read in silence, flipping pages with care. Finally, he looked up. This is Clean B. Your name, your signature, paid in full. If they try anything, it won't hold." I nodded. "Then I want to make a change. The house will not be transferred to them. Not now. Not ever." He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. We finalized everything in less than an hour. He handed me copies in a fresh envelope thicker than before. I placed it in my bag, feeling the weight like a quiet victory. As we stood to leave, he paused and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to justify protecting yourself. Not to me, not to anyone." Driving home, I rolled the window down just a bit and let the wind catch my hair. For the first time in weeks, I felt air in my lungs that didn't come with a weight. The secret I'd been holding for months had transformed. It was no longer a gift waiting to be given. It was leverage, and I intended to use it with precision. The house had always been more than wood and drywall. It was the last story I wrote with Harold. Before he passed, we talked often about what we would leave behind. Jeremy had never asked for anything, but we wanted him to have a foundation, a place to plant roots. That house was supposed to be our legacy, our silent promise that even in death, we were still looking out for him. I remembered the day I signed the offer. My hand trembled a little. Not from fear, but from the weight of it all. The house was modest, yes, but it was ours, bought with a life of restraint and hope. Every decision I made was careful. I used my maiden name on some of the accounts, paid each installment from a separate savings fund I kept hidden even from myself, as though secrecy added a layer of magic to the gesture. I chose the appliances myself, nothing extravagant but reliable. I made sure the plumbing was sound, that the heating worked, that the gutters wouldn't overflow at the first storm. There were small things, too. I planted 2 rose bushes in the backyard, one red, one white, just like the ones Harold used to grow. I imagined Jeremy grilling out there someday, Lacey bringing out lemonade, the faint laughter of children drifting through open windows. I wanted to gift them a beginning unmarred by struggle. But intentions don't always survive the people we give them to. Now, when I thought of that house, it no longer felt like a gift. It felt like a blade, sharpened by my silence, my giving, my grief. And I was done bleeding from it. I would wield it now, on my terms, with the grace they mistook for weakness. I waited until Monday morning. It was early, not quite 8, when I picked up the phone. I had their number written on an old grocery list tucked inside my address book. I'd never called them before, not since the engagement. Lacey had insisted everything go through Jeremy, but today I wasn't calling to go through anyone. The line rang 3 times. Then a breathless, slightly annoyed voice answered. "Hello, Lacey?" I said, calm as still water. "It's Beatrice." There was a pause. "Oh, hi, is everything all right?" "Yes," I said, "just letting you know I dropped off your wedding gift this morning." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear her shuffle, maybe moving into another room. "Oh, that's very kind of you. We didn't see anything in the pile. Was it delivered here?" "Not quite," I said. "It's waiting for you at the new address." "New address?" I smiled into the receiver. "The one off Maple Lane, number 212. Dead silence. Then carefully, "That's the house Jeremy said it was off market. We were going to— Wait, how did you— "I bought it," I said simply. She didn't respond. "You'll find a small cedar box inside the mailbox," I continued, "along with a note. Please do read it." Her voice came back clipped. "Beatrice, if this is some kind of misunderstanding—" "There's no misunderstanding, dear." And then I hung up. I stood there for a moment, phone still in hand, the dial tone humming into the quiet. My heart wasn't racing. My palms weren't sweating. In fact, I felt more steady than I had in years. That had been the first real conversation I'd ever had with Lacey. And I had ended it on my terms. Outside, the wind stirred the maple leaves. A new season had begun. By the time the sun rose the next day, I had already met with Mr. Harrow again. He brought the necessary paperwork with him, a neat stack of documents in a manila envelope, sealed and ready. I offered him coffee. He brought his own. We worked in silence, the kind that comes from long acquaintance. He walked me through each page, explaining with quiet confidence. "You'll want to move the property into a living trust," he said, "so there's no room for interpretation." "Done. We'll also revise your will to reflect the change. Remove their names entirely if you prefer." I nodded. He added a clause regarding conditional inheritance in case Jeremy ever decided to rediscover humility in the future. But I didn't hold my breath. We set up a durable power of attorney, healthcare directives, a financial executor who wasn't Jeremy. It was like closing a series of open doors I hadn't realized were letting in cold air. When we finished, he slid the final folder toward me. "All done, B. You're protected. This house, your accounts, your medical decisions, they all answer to you and only you." I signed the last form, my signature steady. "Do you think I'm being cruel?" I asked. He shook his head. "I think you're being clear." After he left, I sat alone in the den, the sunlight falling across the coffee table where the documents rested like quiet guardians. All those years I spent putting Jeremy first, keeping my name small, my needs smaller. It had left me vulnerable. But not anymore. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone's mother. I felt like someone. After the legal protections were in place, I turned to the rest. My bank accounts were modest but steady. A checking account for bills, a savings account that had grown quiet but reliable. Harold had always believed in conservative investments, bonds, annuities, nothing flashy. And for decades it worked. But I hadn't touched most of it since he passed. It felt like sacred ground. I used the pension, lived light, scrimped where I could. Even after buying the house, there was enough left to keep me comfortable if I planned wisely. So I did. I moved the savings into a revocable trust, the same one now holding the house. I transferred a portion into a new account under that trust's name, separate from Jeremy's reach. I even scheduled monthly distributions to myself, just enough to cover groceries, utilities, and a few simple pleasures. Then I did something I never thought I would. I met with a financial advisor. He was young, polite, and slightly startled when I told him I had no intention of growing my wealth. "I just want to make sure it lasts," I said, "and that no one else touches it." He smiled. "That I can do." We adjusted passwords, set up two-step authentication, shredded old statements. I closed a joint account I'd once opened for Jeremy in college. He hadn't used it in years, but it was still there, a thread I hadn't noticed until I looked closely. I cut it. Every measure felt like another brick in the wall. Not a wall to keep the world out, but a fortress to hold myself in. I hadn't realized how exposed I'd been, how many open windows I'd left behind in the name of trust. Now they were sealed, and I could finally sleep with the door unlocked, not because I was naive, but because I had built something safe. I spent the next morning wrapping the cedar box, not in ribbon or paper, but in something far older intention. I dusted its corners, polished the brass hinges, and opened it one last time. The key still rested beside the folded linen note. Nothing more, nothing less. I considered adding something. A photo of Harold, a copy of the deed, a final message. But I stopped myself. What was inside was enough. Let them fill in the rest with their own silence. The box went into a plain cardboard mailer. No decoration. Just an address written in my neat, slanted hand, 212 Maple Lane. I drove there myself. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the early morning light, or maybe it was the clarity that had settled over me in the past week. The rose bushes in the back had bloomed. The red one tilted toward the fence like it was listening. I parked across the street. No one was home, not yet. I walked the box to the front porch and placed it gently inside the mailbox where the flag stood stiff with anticipation. Then I stepped back. No second thoughts, no nerves, only stillness. On the way home, I stopped by the market and picked up a bunch of peonies. My favorite, a small indulgence long denied. I arranged them in a vase and placed them on the dining table, letting their blush petals open wide in the sunlight. By noon, the message would be waiting. By evening, the weight would shift. And by morning, the new story would begin. That night, I didn't wonder if I had done the right thing. I made myself a real dinner: roasted chicken, sweet potatoes, green beans from the garden. I set the table with one plate, one wine glass, one linen napkin folded with care. And when I sat down, it wasn't with sadness. It was with peace. I ate slowly, savoring each bite. For once, I didn't rush through the silence. I didn't fill it with the radio or the clatter of dishes. I let it be what it was, mine. The phone didn't ring. I had expected as much. They would have found the box by now, opened it, read the note, seen the key. I pictured Jeremy's face when he realized the house wasn't theirs, the sharp click of Lacey's jaw as she reached for explanations that wouldn't come. The ripple of humiliation as the truth sank in their arrogance had burned the bridge they never thought they'd need. I didn't feel triumphant, but I did feel free. After dinner, I washed the dishes, watered the roses, and took out the trash. Ordinary things, grounding things, actions that required no permission and came with no strings. I ended the day with a book, a cup of chamomile, and the knowledge that no one could take this moment from me. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke early. The sun was already climbing, casting gold across the windowsill. I made tea tied on my gardening gloves and stepped outside. Something had changed. Not in the air, not in the house, in me. The point of no return wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It was a quiet woman standing barefoot in her own garden, choosing herself. The first voicemail came at 6:42 a.m. "Hey, Mom. Just got something strange here. Can you give me a call back when you get this?" Then another, 7:03. "Hi again, it's Jeremy. We went by the Maple Lane house this morning. We thought it was... Lacey said it was going to be... Could you call me?" By 7:30, he stopped pretending it was casual. "Why was your name on the deed?" Mom, I didn't answer. I stood at the sink, washing blueberries, the morning sun painting the counter in soft gold. The phone buzzed beside me over and over. I let it. I had waited years for my son to speak to me with urgency. I had just never imagined it would be over property. At 8:17, the first email arrived. Subject, urgent. His tone had shifted now, polite but pressed. He wanted to understand. Said there must have been a mix-up. Asked if maybe the gift had been delayed, if the title company had made an error. I imagined him hunched over a laptop, Lacey pacing behind him. At 9:02, another email. Less polite. By noon, 3 calls had come from a number I didn't recognize. Likely her parents. Maybe even their lawyer. I didn't pick up. Jeremy called again at 12:31. I finally let it go to voicemail. "Mom, please, we don't understand. Everyone's asking questions. We invited friends over to see the place. It's locked. There's a note in the mailbox. People are laughing, Mom. Lacey's in tears. Please can you explain? I played it once, then deleted it. Actions explain more than words ever could. And Jeremy, for the first time, was finally listening to the silence he had spent years ignoring. By that evening, Lacey had taken over. The first call came from her cell, the number I had never saved, but recognized instantly. I let it ring, then it came again, and again. At 6:22 p.m., she left a message. "Beatrice, I think there's been some kind of terrible miscommunication. Jeremy is very upset. I'm honestly shocked. We've told people about the house, we've posted photos, the keys we thought we'd be moving in this week. This isn't like you." She sounded breathless, like a woman whose throne had just been yanked out from under her. I listened to her voice so full of tremor and careful pleading. And I remembered her smile across the ballroom raised glass, narrowed eyes like I was a ghost fading from her wedding. Another message came an hour later. "Beatrice, I need to understand. Did we offend you somehow? Was it the seating? I swear I had no idea about the plate. That must have been a catering mistake. Jeremy feels horrible. We can fix this. We're family." That word. Family. Funny how quickly it appears when something is wanted, how rarely it's used when something is needed. I didn't respond. By 9, sorry, her texts had turned cold. Fewer words, more punctuation. "Legally, this isn't fair. Jeremy said you intended to give it. We were counting on that house." And then one final message. This feels cruel, Beatrice. Unnecessary. I set the phone down gently. No one had called it cruel when they served me nothing in front of everyone I once knew. No one said unnecessary when I was folded into corners and made invisible. What Lacey felt now wasn't cruelty, it was consequence. And she was finally feeling it where it hurt, in reputation, in certainty, in control. They came to the house on a Thursday. No warning, no call. I saw them through the kitchen window. Jeremy in a dress shirt wrinkled at the elbows, lacy in heels too high for my walkway. Her face was tight mascara already smudged beneath one eye. He looked older than I remembered. I opened the door, but did not invite them in. "Mom," Jeremy started, "can we please talk?" I nodded, stepped aside, and led them to the living room. The room had not changed. Same worn sofa, same lace curtains Harold insisted were out of style, and I insisted were charming. I sat in my usual chair. They didn't. "We were blindsided," Lacey said quickly. "You made us look like fools." "Did I?" I asked, calm. Jeremy rubbed his face. "You were going to give us that house. You said it was a gift." "No," I replied. "I never said that. You assumed." He flinched. Lacey crossed her arms. "You humiliated us. People are talking. My parents—" "Do they know you served me an empty plate?" I asked. Silence. "I didn't know about that," Jeremy said, his voice low. "I swear. And if you had, would you have stopped it or just apologized after, like always?" He looked down. I leaned forward, not angry, just clear. "You both made choices. I did too. Mine were legal, deliberate, and mine to make. That house was never owed." Lacey opened her mouth, but Jeremy placed a hand on her arm. He looked at me, finally meeting my eyes. "So that's it." I stood. "No. That's the beginning." They left without hugging me, without a goodbye. When the door closed behind them, I didn't cry. I felt like stone that had been weathered into shape. Not cruel, complete. The implosion didn't happen all at once. It came in whispers, in passive-aggressive posts, in the cracks between two people who had never expected consequences. I heard it first from Linda Cartwright at the post office. Saw Lacey at the grocery store. She looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole, didn't even say hello. Then from Brenda, who teaches yoga with Lacey's mother. They say the house thing was some huge mistake, that it was promised and then revoked. Promised, not given, not earned, just expected. I said nothing. A week later, Jeremy showed up at the house alone. He didn't come in, just stood on the porch looking lost. "She's not speaking to me," he said. "Says I lied. Says I should have clarified everything with you. Did you—" He didn't answer. He looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from watching the future you planned slide sideways while everyone is watching. "You know," he said quietly, "I told myself you just misunderstood things. That maybe you were confused." "I wasn't." He nodded more to himself than to me. "She's staying with her parents for now. Says we need space." I studied his face, looking for the boy who once cried when his goldfish died. All I saw was a man unraveling from the inside out. "Actions have echoes, Jeremy," I said. "Sometimes they bounce back louder than we expect." He blinked, stepped back. "I don't know how to fix this." "Maybe you don't." And I closed the door. Not out of malice, but because some lessons are only learned when no one rushes to comfort the person who broke the plate, then blamed the table. The next message didn't come from Jeremy or Lacey. It came from a lawyer. A sharply worded letter arrived in my mailbox, embossed with a firm name that sounded like old money and newer ambition. They were formally inquiring about the status of the Maple Lane property. There was mention of verbal agreements, of implied intent, of considerable emotional distress. Lacey's name was listed first. I made myself tea before reading it again. Then I walked it to the recycling bin and dropped it in without ceremony. 2 days later, Jeremy called again. He didn't leave a message. Then Lacey. This time she didn't plead. She demanded. "You misled us," she snapped on voicemail. "You let us believe I stopped the recording. I already knew the tone. I had lived in its shadow for months." I forwarded the letter to Mr. Harrow. He called me 10 minutes later, amused. "They don't have a case," he said flatly. "You have every receipt, every signature, every document. Let them rattle their sabers. It changes nothing." Still, the noise grew louder. Mutual friends began calling the polite kind, the kind who didn't want to take sides, but also didn't want to lose wedding photos from their social feeds. "I just think this all could have been handled more gracefully," one said. I laughed. Grace was what I had given, again and again. What I received was a silent table and a cold plate. No one had spoken then. Now, with their reputations on the line, they found their voices. Desperation has a sound. It mimics righteousness. It masquerades as civility. It hides behind legalese and etiquette. But I could hear it for what it was. Fear. And for once, it wasn't mine. I didn't want their world to fall apart. But it had been built on illusion. Lacey had posted a photo of the Maple Lane house on social media weeks before the wedding. Tagged it with words like, "Our forever home," and "Dreams come true." The comments were full of hearts and fire emojis, congratulations from people who had no idea how quietly entitlement blooms. Then the truth cracked through. The post disappeared first. Then the congratulations turned to questions. Whispers that the house wasn't really theirs, that something had gone wrong. I heard through Brenda that Lacey's father had co-signed a loan for them. They had started renovations on a space they didn't own, contractors left unpaid, deposits forfeited. A photographer canceled her next booking with them. "It's not about the money," Brenda whispered. "It's about the embarrassment. Weddings stretch people. It's one of the things no one says out loud. The photos look pretty, but beneath them are maxed cards, quiet fights, and hopes pinned on the illusion that everything will work out." Jeremy had taken out a personal loan. Lacey had quit her job expecting to focus on building their brand. They were banking on comfort that had never been guaranteed, and when the house vanished, so did the foundation. By the end of the month, they were staying in Lacey's childhood bedroom. Jeremy called one more time. His voice was hoarse. "We messed up, I know that, but we can't breathe. Everything's falling. We need help." I didn't call back. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. Some lessons come late, and some debts cannot be paid in apologies. It wasn't just the money. It was the way people began to look at them. The wedding photos once pinned across social feeds slowly vanished. Comments under old posts were quietly deleted. Friends who had once called Lacey inspirational started using words like entitled and performative. People remember kindness, but they never forget a spectacle. At church, the whispers followed them like shadows. Lacey stopped attending altogether. Jeremy came once, sat in the back left before the final hymn. His tie was loose. His smile didn't reach. The community they had carefully cultivated, all curated images and perfect captions, cracked under the pressure of scrutiny. A story had surfaced, and people love a story, especially when it feels like justice dressed in good lighting. I said nothing. When invited to brunch by a group of women who had once overlooked me at baby showers, I declined. I wasn't interested in trading my dignity for gossip. Let the silence speak for itself. Lacey tried to pivot, started posting about humility and growth and life's unexpected turns. She opened up comments for a few hours, then locked them again after the tone shifted. Too many people asking too many questions she hadn't rehearsed answers for. Jeremy updated his LinkedIn, changed his location to open to opportunities. One evening I passed them in the grocery store. They didn't see me. Lacey was whispering angrily, Jeremy nodding like a man trying to find footing on a cliff. I turned down another aisle. Not out of cruelty, out of self-preservation. Their storm wasn't mine to walk through. I had already made it to the other side. Their world grew smaller. The wedding glow faded fast. The photos on their mantel became reminders of a promise unkept. Even the gifts once stacked like trophies began to feel hollow. A blender unopened, crystals still in the box, friends stopped texting, invitations dried up. Nobody wants to be too close when a fairy tale ends badly, especially one built on someone else's sacrifice. Lacey withdrew first. She stopped leaving the house claiming migraines, anxiety, fatigue. Jeremy picked up groceries alone. I heard from Linda at the pharmacy that she had been prescribed something for sleep. Jeremy emailed me once more. No anger, no demands, just a single line, "I miss how things used to be." I didn't reply, because I missed them too, but I couldn't chase ghosts anymore. Their final act of isolation wasn't imposed by me. It was the natural end to a performance no longer sustained by applause. The audience had turned away. The curtain had dropped. At church, people stopped asking me about them. They knew better now. At home, I filled my days with new things: morning walks, lavender tea, organizing old photo albums, not with grief, but with fondness. The silence that used to echo in my home now felt gentle. I wasn't angry. I wasn't triumphant. I was whole. Let them sit in the stillness they once forced on me. Let them taste the edges of the absence they served with ceremony. This was not revenge. This was the echo of justice. And it arrived not with fury, but with peace. Freedom didn't arrive in a dramatic rush. It came slowly, in the way I opened the curtains without hesitation. In the first morning, I chose real clothes instead of worn pajamas. In the grocery aisle, where I reached for the expensive jam, not because I needed it, but because I wanted it. It came in the decision to stop waiting, for calls, for apologies, for acknowledgement. One afternoon, I saw a flyer pinned to the bulletin board at the library: "Community garden volunteers needed." I stood there a long time holding a returned novel in one hand and the echo of my old routines in the other. Then I pulled the tab with the phone number. The garden sat behind the elementary school, raised beds, uneven stepping stones, and the smell of damp mulch. On my first day, I met Lorraine, a retired nurse with strong hands and a sharp tongue. She gave me gloves, pointed to the chart, and said, "They're bolting, fix it." I did. By the end of the morning, my back ached and my knees were dusted with earth, and I felt more alive than I had in years. The next week I came back. They didn't ask about my past. They didn't need my story. All they wanted was my presence, my hands, my patience. I had spent so long shrinking, making room, giving away pieces of myself in teaspoons. Now I was planting, and something in me had finally taken root. Freedom wasn't loud. It was a warm sun, a pair of gloves, and the courage to begin again. My days began to find shape again. Not the shape of obligation or habit, but something gentler, intentional. I woke up early, not out of duty, but because I wanted to see the morning light crawl across the floor. I started keeping a small notebook on the nightstand where I scribbled anything that made me smile, a dream, a robin's call, the scent of lemon oil after wiping down the table. Routine used to feel like confinement. Now it felt like scaffolding. On Mondays and Thursdays, I worked in the garden. On Wednesdays, I went to the library and checked out books with no planned poetry history, even mysteries with ridiculous titles. I let myself get lost in other lives. Fridays became my day for the market. I no longer scanned prices out of habit. I bought flowers just because. Daisies, tulips, sunflowers. I placed them in glass jars all over the house, letting brightness bloom in corners long forgotten. I called people, not out of guilt, but curiosity. I let the phone ring without bracing for impact. Lorraine from the garden invited me to join her quilting group. I didn't know how to quilt, but I went anyway. I sat among women who stitched stories into fabric, who laughed at their own jokes, who passed down secrets between thread and thimble. And no one asked me what had happened, because by then it didn't matter. The rhythm I found wasn't about erasing the past. It was about giving it a new backdrop, something softer, something my own. Every dish I washed, every curtain I opened, every path I walked with a steady step, it all became a kind of prayer, not for what I lost, but for what I had quietly, tenderly begun to build. It happened by accident. I was dusting the hallway closet when I found the old box. Inside, beneath scarves and holiday cards from years ago, was my sketch pad. The cover was creased, the spiral binding bent, but the pages inside, yellowed, soft-smelling faintly of graphite and cedar, were still mine. I had drawn through most of my 20s. Before Jeremy, before the mortgage, before responsibility tucked my creativity into boxes marked someday. I carried the pad to the kitchen table and flipped through it slowly. Faces I had long forgotten stared back at me. Neighbors' trees, Harold's hands resting on the steering wheel. Simple moments made sacred through lines. That afternoon I walked to the art store. I hadn't been in one in years. The smell of paper and pigment felt like stepping into a memory I hadn't realized I missed. I bought pencils, a kneaded eraser, a small set of pastels. At home, I sat by the window and let my hand move. At first, it was stiff, uncertain. My fingers ached. But somewhere between the outline of a rose and the shading of its petals, I felt it, that quiet immersion, the world softening around me. I drew every day after that. Sunlight through curtains, a robin on the feeder, Lorraine's crooked grin, my own hand holding a mug. I wasn't trying to be good. I was trying to feel, and I did. It wasn't about filling time. It was about claiming space. For so long, my hands had served others, cooking, cleaning, giving. Now they created. I pinned sketches to the fridge. I mailed one to a friend in Idaho. I framed one and placed it above the mantel right beside the roses Harold planted. It was a woman's face, not young, not smooth, but open and calm. And for the first time in years, it looked like me. It started with a postcard. One of my sketches, the robin on the feeder, scanned and printed on thick stock at the library print station. I wrote a short note on the back and mailed it to Margaret, my college roommate, whom I hadn't seen in over 20 years. I didn't expect a reply. 2 weeks later, I got a letter, handwritten, long. Margaret had retired to Oregon, started painting again, and remembered the cinnamon rolls I used to sneak into the dorm kitchen. After that, I wrote another, to Joan in Vermont, then to my cousin Millie in Colorado. I wasn't trying to rebuild the past, just extend a hand into the quiet. One letter became two became 10. Old friendships once fossilized in time began to breathe again. Not all at once. Some never responded, but others did. And slowly the silence I had lived with for so long began to fill with color. I hosted tea one Saturday. Just 4 women, all over 60, all with stories stitched into their skin. We laughed. We cried a little. We swapped recipes and regrets. Lorraine brought lemon bars and told me I should show my drawings at the community center. I laughed it off, but the idea lingered. Connection, I realized, didn't have to be big. It didn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it was a small envelope in a mailbox, a chair pulled out at the right time, a voice saying, "You too." I used to think reaching out meant exposing something, risking something. Now I saw it for what it really was, an invitation, to be seen, to see others, and to belong again, not as someone's mother or widow or afterthought, but simply as Beatrice. The woman at the quilting circle, Jean, I think her name was, leaned over one morning and whispered, "You're the one who sent that letter to Millie, aren't you? The one with the robin." I smiled. Guilty. She grinned back. "She put it on her fridge. Talks about you like you walked on water." It startled me how far something small could travel. A drawing, a kind word, a story that hadn't asked to be told, but found its way anyway. At the garden, Lorraine told me that her niece had started sketching again, said she saw one of my robins and picked up a pencil that had been gathering dust for years. Even the librarian commented, "Your poems, the ones you leave in the returned books, we keep them now. The staff reads them aloud during closing. Hope that's all right." I laughed. I hadn't realized they noticed, but they had. I wasn't trying to inspire anyone. I wasn't building a platform or seeking admiration. I was just living more fully than I had in years, and in doing so I had become visible again. There was something profound in that, to realize that healing doesn't just mend your own heart, it sends waves into the lives of others. People began showing up with stories. A woman who hadn't spoken to her sister in a decade, a man who finally took a walk around the block, a teenager who started writing letters to her grandmother, all because someone somewhere decided not to disappear. I never said much, just listened, smiled. Sometimes I gave them a sketch. The world, it turns out, needs quiet witnesses, people who show what survival looks like when it isn't loud, when it isn't angry, just honest. And in that honesty, others find permission to begin again, to bloom even after frost, after. I wrote the last letter in the fall. The trees had turned their colors loud and unapologetic. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and the light catching the rim of the mug just so. The air smelled like cinnamon and dry leaves. The pen moved slowly, as if it knew this one mattered. "Dear Harold," I began. It had been years since I wrote to him. I used to right after he passed. Little notes I kept in a box, updates, confessions, ramblings. But this one felt different. "I wanted to tell you that I'm all right," I wrote, "not just surviving, living." I told him about the house, about the wedding, about the humiliation and the silence and how it nearly swallowed me. I told him how I got back up. I wrote about the garden and Lorraine, about the robin sketch and the peonies and the letters, about how I saw myself again in a stranger's smile and in the steady lines of a pencil. "You always said I was stronger than I looked," I wrote. "Turns out you were right." I didn't mention Jeremy in detail. Not out of bitterness, but because this letter wasn't about grief anymore. It was about becoming. "I carry you with me," I ended. But I finally stopped waiting to be rescued, and in doing so, I rescued myself. I folded the letter and placed it inside an envelope with no stamp. I tucked it into the cedar box, the one that once held keys and consequences. It now held truth, and I closed the lid, not to bury the past, but to honor it. There was no grand finale, no swelling music, no final confrontation, just me on a bench at the edge of the garden watching the light fall over rows of kale and marigolds. The wind had shifted, cooler now, carrying the scent of tilled soil and late blooms. Lorraine was pruning something in the distance. A child's laughter rang out from the schoolyard. This was peace, not the kind promised in glossy magazines or whispered by self-help gurus, but the peace that comes when you're no longer performing. I used to think contentment was a smaller life, a quiet concession, a giving up. But it's not. It's choosing, deliberately, where to place your time, your breath, your love. Jeremy never called again. Lacey sent a holiday card months later with no return address, a photo of them in front of a new apartment. I looked at it for a moment, then tucked it away. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from holding the rope. I kept painting. I kept walking. I kept showing up to the places that made me feel alive. Some mornings I still felt the ghost of the woman I had once been, hunched small, waiting for permission. But I no longer invited her in, because I had built something stronger in her place, something rooted, something real. And when I walked through the door of my own home, it didn't echo anymore. It held me, because I had finally decided I was worth the space I took up.